Wow. Increíble.
If you ever hear pilots say wow or incredible during your landing, it's rarely because you did something so good that they were just like very impressed by it. It's usually because something was very dangerous or scary or they couldn't believe what they saw, which is the situation here. Something that the pilots did or were part of that was so dangerous that the pilots on the ground decided to transmit their shock over the radios, which is crazy. Check this out.
Torre México, buen día, costera 1631, una aproximación final 05 derecha, RNP.
Oh yeah, I forgot. You're a couple of American pilots, you're down in Central or South America, and you don't speak Spanish, which means you don't know what's going on. Now, when I used to fly a lot into South America, I'm not fluent in Spanish, but I speak the basics, and I know the things that are important like takeoff or clear for takeoff and landing and the numbers and left and right. So I'm able to have some good situational awareness while I'm down there, but that's not true in a lot of places that we go because I literally go everywhere in the world. So I can't always do that, but it just so happens I speak basic Spanish, so I was able to understand what was going on when I was in South America, except for Brazil. All this is taking place in Mexico City, which is a pretty awesome city as long as you don't mind traffic. And their airport in Mexico City has 2 parallel runways, 5 left and 5 right. So you have cinco izquierda, cinco derecha. Those are the 2 runways that are on there. And there's this massive misconception that all pilots and all controllers are always going to speak or should be speaking English everywhere in the world. It's this massive misconception I see with people online, and some pilots are saying it, some people leaving comments and talking about it are saying it, and I'll kind of explain what the rules are in just a second here. But far as we know, because I don't have the control tower audio, as far as we know, Delta, a Boeing 737, Delta 590 has lined up and waited on 5 right, and that was an instruction from the controller. Now, it's important to know that it's common practice in most airports around the world that when you have 2 parallel runways, you're going to use one runway primarily for takeoff and one runway primarily for landing. Typically, your inboard runway, meaning the closest to the terminal, is going to be used for takeoff, and your outboard runway is going to be used for landing. So at this particular airport, your traffic flow may look like this, where these planes are landing on 5 right and they'll either taxi back to the terminal via Delta and Echo, or they'll do like they do in Newark, and they'll line the planes up here, scattered across the runway, and then when they have 4 or 5 planes lined up, ready to go, they'll tell them all to cross at once, and it'll be like cockroaches scampering across the runway. And that's a typical setup at most runways everywhere in the world that have parallel runways. Not every airport has parallel runways. So it's also not unusual, for example, for me, let's say, to be given one of the landing runways. Sometimes it's because of performance. It can also happen in a situation that you're giving one of the landing runways because you're on that side of the airport or you're turning a different direction or the same direction, or there's a few different situations that you might be given that landing runway, if you will, for takeoff. So getting assigned that runway isn't something that would be odd or cause for concern if you were given it. It's happened to me plenty of times, sometimes because I'm on the cargo side, which is usually the opposite side of the terminal side of the airport. Sometimes it's because my plane is close to 1,000,000 pounds and it's easier to get off on a longer runway, and sometimes the landing runway happens to be the longer runway. So there's several different scenarios, so being assigned a landing runway, if you will, for takeoff wouldn't raise any alarms for me. So if I'm these Delta pilots told to line up and wait on 5 right, which let's say they're using that for landing right now, I wouldn't be like, something seems suspicious. But again, we don't have the audio from the tower. I couldn't find it after I got sent this audio. I couldn't really find it, so I'm not sure that that's what was told, but it seems like that was what they were told. So keep in mind here, you're Delta 590, you're lined up on the runway 5 right, just like earlier. If you don't speak Spanish, you don't know what's going on, but I'm going to put the subtitles in so you understand everything. Check this out.
Torre México, buen día, costera 1631, una aproximación final 05 derecha, RNP. 3044, continuamos aproximación, costera 1631. Autorizados para aterrizar, costera 1631.
Alright, just take off 5 right and once you 5 right.
Costera is the call sign of a regional carrier for Aeromexico. So just like you have in the US, you'll have Delta Connections or whatever for different carriers, American Eagle for American. You have these smaller regional jets that are used as feeder lines into the main airline, and they typically have a different call sign because it's separate, a different entity. So this Costera call sign is working as a feeder line for Aeromexico, and basically something that she's doing, which is not the way it's supposed to be, is anytime you're landing, crossing a runway, or cleared for takeoff on any runway, she should be saying that runway, like clear to land runway 5 right. But it doesn't sound like she says that, and she says this.
Autorizados para aterrizar Costera 1631.
So sometimes it can happen when you have high workload that sometimes you make the wrong call or you don't properly use correct phraseology in a call. It happens. It's happened to me. It's happened to every pilot. I think you'd be lying to say that you always properly do every call sign every time. That's not realistic. So it does happen from time to time, but it is very important that you install the best phraseology discipline that you can get early on. And if you ever have the unfortunate experience of having to fly with me, if you are good on the radio, I will tell you, man, you're really great at the radio. I will tell them that. And if you're using all kinds of slang or things that are improper that is not going to work, especially outside the US, I will tell you that too. I'll shoot you straight so you know. Because if you have that improper phraseology, like, hey, you're clear to land, and just saying clear to land, it creates a lack of situational awareness for everybody around you. So here are my two biggest concerns with the Aeromexico Connect crew right here. First, they're saying they're clear to land, but there's already another plane lined up on the runway. I thought maybe it was nighttime, but no, it was 7:30 in the morning, so it was clearly daylight. They should be able to see a plane. The other thing about 5 right, it's not a normal runway. It has a displaced threshold. So while this runway is over 13,000 feet, this section right here is only usable for takeoff, not landing, which means the pilots are targeting and looking and focusing on landing on this area, which is where their eyes are. So while they may not necessarily be focused on this section of the runway, you would think in daytime, coming in, with it being over the threshold, that you would see a plane there on your flight path that you were going to fly right over in order to go ahead and land. The other thing is that I thought, okay, well, the Delta pilot said they were cleared to take off 5 right. I thought, well, it's possible that these pilots don't speak English, right? If you were just flying domestic, could you get away with not learning English? Well, some airlines won't let you do that, but I don't know the rules here, so I decided to look. This is a book from the International Civil Aviation Organization, which pilots typically call ICAO, and they put out a bunch of different manuals on what's acceptable standards around the world, covering literally every topic. This one, as you can see, is all about how we communicate. Now, it's a very brief 132 pages of pleasurable reading, but the thing to realize is this is a guideline, meaning everybody gets together from around the world, all the different aviation people, and they kind of come up with like, hey, this is what I think should be the way that we should handle things everywhere around the world. And so they all kind of have their own input and they come up with their own ideas of the way that it should be done. That being the case of the way that it should be done, now those countries have the option, but not the requirement, to implement those things. Having that ICAO standard is, this is the standard that we think everybody should be going for, and then it's up to, for example, in the US, the FAA to say, okay, this is kind of what they're aiming for, but instead we decide to do this. You could do it that way, but typically everybody has their input, and that's typically the standard everywhere in the world. And there's something in here I massively disagree with, and that's down here all the way on page 80. It talks about the languages to be used. It says, the air-ground radio-telephonic communication shall be conducted in the language normally used by the station on the ground or in the English language. So this confusion that people have that everyone is required to speak English is not true. They have the option to do it. Now, some countries choose to have everybody speak English. You heard me talk about that. Japan is one of those countries. Their pilots and their controllers are speaking English. I think that that's good for situational awareness of everybody knowing what's going on, even though it's a difficult thing for them to be inconvenienced to have to speak to somebody from their home country in a foreign language. And there are cases that I have heard of Japanese aircraft having an emergency mayday situation where the controller authorizes them to now speak in Japanese. At that point, it's kind of irrelevant. Air traffic control is very focused on them. They're going to be away. They're going to be keeping all the other planes away. So in that case, it allows that pilot to speak more freely, and it makes sense in that situation to authorize them to speak in their native language to more quickly communicate without having to necessarily think about it, because some people are able to fluently speak a second language. Some people need to think more clearly about what they want to say. And when you have a high workload environment, like a major situation that's life or death on your aircraft, which would require a Mayday call, then they want you to be able to focus on that, not speaking clearly so the other planes around you can understand what's going on, because everybody around you is going to be pushed away from you. So I looked it up, and according to the Wikipedia page, Costera does fly to the US, which means while they were coming in to land on 5 right, these pilots should be able to understand and hear Delta when they were getting their takeoff clearance for taking off from 5 right, and realize this was going to be a problem unless they were cleared to take off from 5 left, which again, I don't think was the situation. So by that airline requiring their pilots or having their flight schedules where they go into the United States, they do a lot of other countries, but going into the United States, they're not going to say, okay, you're part of this group of the non-English speakers and you guys are the English speakers. They're not going to do that. So you're going to come here, you have to speak this level of English or better. Now, some airlines, whether they fly international or not, might require that. They say, oh, you're just doing domestic stuff? That's fine. All of our pilots are required to do that. Other airlines might not have that, so I don't know. However, in this situation where the airline is flying to the United States, that means that all their pilots are going to have a basic level of understanding of English to be able to communicate on the radio, because they're flying to the US. And when they come to the US, they're going to need to speak English with our air traffic controllers in the States, which means that this pilot, when she's talking on the radio, or the pilot that she's flying with, both of them should be able to hear when the Delta pilot says, hey, all right, we're taking off 5 right, and go, oh, that's the runway we're landing on. That's going to be a problem. Watch what happens.
We are holding on the runway.
Wow. Increíble.
Hablando Superman.
Okay, Delta 590, you said to make a right turn off the runway 5 right on Bravo 4, correct? Delta 590 will make a right turn off of runway 5 right on Bravo 4.
Wow is right, and for a few reasons. This is a major airport, by the way. This isn't just a small little airport. This is Mexico City. This is the capital city. They should have, I would imagine, the same technology that the US has, which is when they have a conflict, that it alerts them to this being a conflict. I would imagine they would have that in an airport like this. So the fact that they don't, that's a wow. And if they do and it got overridden or they ignored it, that's a wow. So there's really no way that that's not a wow from the air traffic control standpoint. 2, neither of these pilots coming into land saw this plane on the runway or heard Delta say they were cleared to land. And we've already clarified that they speak English. And then 3, and this one is the one that I'm least surprised about. You have these pilots that are on the ground. I'm guessing these are pilots that either landed on 5 right and had circled back around and were taxiing over to their gate, or potentially on the other side of the airport that were seeing it. And they saw this plane sitting on the runway. They saw this plane get cleared for takeoff, and they saw this plane coming in to land. Now, these other pilots, especially the one who said increíble, they're obviously speaking Spanish. So they would have heard this pilot cleared for 5 right and seen this pilot clear for takeoff on 5 right and possibly looked up. The reason I say this is the least surprising is that when I'm not involved, let's say I'm just taxiing, I'm barely paying attention to what's going on with the other planes around me that are doing takeoffs and landings. Once I'm now getting ready for takeoff or landing, now I'm really paying attention to everything that's going on. But like, oh, I'm taxiing, oh, this guy's cleared for takeoff, this guy's cleared for landing. It's kind of in my background, but I'm not really trying to police the whole airport and watch for every other plane. I'm busy focused in taxiing my aircraft and making sure that we're crossing the correct taxiways. So it's not surprising to me that these other pilots didn't hear it. The other thing is that as you see these planes coming in, this is a very close parallel runway. So if you did see it, you would be thinking, no, that must be landing on 5 left. There's no way that guy's landing on 5 right, is he? Like you would be doubting it, and you would have to be 100% certain to do something like telling these guys that are landing 5 right to go around. It would be, I've never heard that, to be honest with you. But if you saw that and you were just absolutely 100% certain, hey, 5 right, go around, because you wouldn't necessarily remember their call sign or whatever, or say 5 right, there's a plane on the runway, anything like that, you'd have to be 100% certain or very certain that that was the right call, because if you said that and they were landing on 5 left, you created all this unnecessary confusion for the plane taking off for 5 right, for the guys that were landing and they were landing on 5 left, and now you're the jerk. So there might have been somebody looking at it, or a couple of these guys that were looking at it, and they saw this coming in and they were thinking like, and not really sure of exactly what was going on, because they wouldn't have been really listening to the air traffic control talking, because they'd be busy doing their checklist for after takeoff or after landing and all that stuff. They would be focused on that. So that's not as surprising to me, but if you happen to be there and you happen to see that, then you got to speak up. But they didn't say anything probably until they saw that plane on the takeoff roll and then the plane come over the top of it, and then they realized what was going on and they thought like, wow. And the other problem that you have is if you're a pilot and you're seeing this is like speaking up and then stepping on the controller, meaning that controller wants to say go around, but that transmission doesn't go through because you're busy there as a pilot giving instructions to other pilots, which is really not how it's supposed to happen. So that one's the least surprising of the 3, but somebody obviously saw that it was happening. 2 different people saw that it was happening, and whoever the guy who said Superman was. So at least 2 different people saw that that was happening, right? And neither of them said anything. Now, Delta did end up vacating the runway here at Bravo 4. As you can see, their takeoff distance wasn't really that far, so they probably weren't going that fast. They weren't that far down the runway. But it is shocking to me that none of the pilots landing, none of the air traffic control, or nobody said anything on the ground, all those 3 things, and then having the pilots that speak English and hearing a plane that's below them on their runway that they're landing on getting cleared for takeoff, like all of those things would be very alarming to me. When I'm coming into land, for example, I've talked about this, I'm coming into land and let's say I'm landing on a runway that they're using for takeoff, which happens sometimes. Some of our planes, the only runway that will work on for landing for us is a runway that they use for takeoff. Miami is an example. There is one runway on one of our aircraft, the Dash 8, the heavier aircraft, at certain times that we could only land on one runway, which that runway is used for takeoff. They were firing off plane after plane after plane, and we were all very focused on obviously landing the plane and doing all of those things, but also listening and watching as the planes were getting cleared for takeoff and verifying that they were off the runway because it was nighttime, so we wanted to see. So it's one of those things that you got to really pay attention to what's going on and having that situational awareness around you. Obviously, it's in English, which is my native language, which makes it easier for me. But again, these pilots, from what I can imagine, they speak English. The only people that are really out of the loop here is the Delta pilots, because if they don't speak Spanish, they're not going to hear this cleared to land on 5 right, which I'm guessing the tower said, but I don't have the audio, and the pilot never said it. So, and because they're speaking Spanish, they can't have that situational awareness, which is why I keep saying I feel like every center, every control tower, everywhere in the world should be speaking English, because then everybody can be situationally aware. You have places where you'll go like France. Now, Spanish is obviously a very widely spoken language, but you'll go to places like France. Well, it's the French, and obviously a lot of the places in Africa, they speak French, but you'll have a place that you'll go to where they don't speak, let's say you'll go into Portugal. Well, we got all of Brazil and Portugal. Those are the only people speaking Portuguese. So if you're in Europe with all those other languages and the controllers over there were speaking Portuguese, nobody else knows what's going on except the people that are flying in there that are Portuguese, and everybody else is kind of in the dark. That's what happens to me. I don't go to Portugal very often, but I go to Brazil. Sometimes I have a pilot with us, a 3rd pilot or a 4th pilot, and they are originally from Brazil or Portugal. A lot of times, especially, well, they're going to be up there for takeoff and landing anyways, but it's really nice to have them there, and I always like, what's happening? So they can kind of give me a situational awareness of what's going on, and I don't usually have to ask. I'll say, hey, that guy got cleared to land. I think we're following this traffic. So I can kind of, in my mind, get an idea of like, where are we in line and what's happening down there. But if everybody was speaking English, we wouldn't have that problem. So the fact that ICAO sets the standard of native language of that country or English, I think it should just be English. Everybody follow the Japanese standard, which is everybody speak English except in an emergency. I think is really how it should be, because for safety, if you were to have this exact same situation at night, there's a risk of this plane landing on top of this Boeing 737 from Delta, which would be catastrophic. Luckily, that didn't happen, but I think this would be a great time to use this as an example in a case to change this rule. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.